Okay, here we go, my dear friends. We are back up and running. Okay, good morning, everyone. It's so wonderful to be here as we are every Thursday morning. I want to share with you an idea that has been so impactful that I think it's really, really important for us to remember this. Okay, so the second portion that we read this week is Balak. Balak was a king of Moab, and he hired a prophet named Bilam to curse the Jewish people. And it's very interesting that Bilam is unsuccessful to do that in doing that. And Balak. There's a whole story you can read in the Parsha about all of this. But you ever wonder? And I think we may have mentioned this in previous years, but every year when we get back to this Parsha, I think of this again and again. Right? How did Moshe even know about the story? How did he know about the story? Right? Here is Balak and Bilam standing on top of a mountain overlooking the Jewish people encampment, okay, their encampment. And Balak says to Bilam, I want to curse the Jewish people. Right? And Bilam says, I can't because it's God's people. I won't be able to. And they keep on going back and forth, having this whole conversation. And then it turns out when he tries to utter a curse, God turns it into a blessing. Right? How does the story get into the Torah? How does the story get into the Torah? So imagine Moshe is transcribing word for word as God is saying, and suddenly he starts saying, and there was a king of Moab who was trying to kill the Jewish people. He called, and Moshe is looking, was like, what? When did this happen? Right? Moshe had no idea of this. So why does the Torah include the story? You know how many thousands of times people have tried to persecute us and it wasn't successful? And we don't know about it. But Hashem added it into the Torah so that we know that even when we don't know what's going on, Hashem is there protecting us. The guardian of Israel doesn't sleep and doesn't slumber and doesn't take a day off and doesn't stop protecting us constantly, even when we don't know about it, right? And there's who knows how many times that things happen, or right, and Hashem says, you know what? I don't want this person to be impacted by it. Someone was intentionally trying to hurt us. God protects us. I think it's such an important lesson for us to understand from this Parsha that we don't understand everything that's going on. What we do is we try to understand everything that goes on. Okay. We try to understand everything that's going on. And sometimes Hashem just gives us a little glimpse into what he's saving us from. I think that is very, very, very important for us to be aware, of what's going on. Now, and to be aware of Hashem's miracles that he performs for us every single day. Now, if we go to this week's Parsha is CHUKAS, right? So they have CHUKAS and Balak. Now, it's very interesting, and just to give you a technical update here, okay, is that Shavuot fell out on Thursday and Friday. Sorry, it fell out on Friday, right? Now, the second day for those of us in diaspora is Shabbos. But in Israel, it wasn't a holiday. It was only because they only have one day of the holiday of Shavuot. So for them, it was a regular Shabbat, so they read the regular Shabbat portion of that week. For us, it was holiday. So we're 1 week behind the people living in Israel. Till this week's Parsha, where they're only going to read Balak, and we're going to read CHUKAS and Balak together. So let me talk a little bit about CHUKAS. So we know that everything that Hashem created, he created for a purpose. Correct? Everything Hashem created for a purpose. So what's the purpose of creating something that we don't know the purpose of? Like the red heifer. What's the purpose in Hashem giving us a mitzvah that we have no idea for its reasoning? Right? I think it's a very reasonable question. Right? So the answer our sages give is very, very important, is that we don't only observe things because we understand them. I think for our children, this is a very important lesson, but us as adults, it's an even more important lesson. Just because we don't understand something, we don't know the reason for something, doesn't mean it's not something that we need to abide by. Okay, I'll give you an example, right? We have thousands and thousands and thousands of laws in the United States. Do we understand every one of them? No. But does that mean that we don't need to observe them? No. Of course we have to. Right? We have to observe the laws because these are the laws. Why the laws? Just because we don't know the reasoning of laws, and particularly for our children, right? So do we have to explain to our children why we say yes and why we say no? We shouldn't. Right? We shouldn't. Because when I say no, it means no. I don't have to give reasons for it. And that's the lesson that Hashem is teaching us with this mitzvah of the red heifer, that we have no idea for its reasoning. Now, there are many hints. There are many hints. And the Midrash talks about many hints that it's a repair for the red heifer. That, you know, what's red? Red is a sign of sin. White is a sign of purity, right? So we have a red heifer to show us this is a tikkun, this is a repair for the red heifer. It's not any other animal. It's specifically the same exact animal that was brought as a idol, right, for the Jewish people. The same exact animal is the red heifer, right? We don't need to know all the reasons for it. We don't need to know the reasons. We don't need to know any reasons for it. We observe it because Hashem commanded us. And for many mitzvahs, we have the reasons for it. Hashem gives us, He explains it to us, right? It's written right there in the Torah. We have the Talmud, we have the Mishnah, we have many great commentaries, right, giving us explanations to the mitzvahs. This mitzvah is closed. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. King Solomon said he felt like he was inadequate, and he didn't have any wisdom because he didn't know the understanding because he didn't know the understanding of paraduma. He didn't know the reason for it. He felt like all wisdom was hidden from him because he didn't have the understanding. Okay. We don't need to know the reasons for everything. Okay. So that is the piece for me that I get out of this week's Parsha of Chukas is, you know what? It's important to have laws that you understand. It's important to have a passion for the mitzvahs, so you learn up the reasons for it. You know, the Sefer HaChinuch was written. It's a book we have at the Torch Center. It's a whole series now. The Art Scroll produced it really, really, really beautifully, explaining every mitzvah. Really did a magnificent job translating it. So you have the introduction to the Sefer HaChinuch. The introduction, he says as follows. He says, I don't want anyone to think that the reason I'm writing this book is so that we should have the reasons for mitzvahs, and that's why we should perform them. He says it's very dangerous to go into that territory of doing mitzvahs because we understand them. Rather, we do them because Hashem commanded us. This, he says, I'm writing this book to only add flavor. We're going to perform it anyway. But let's just add the flavor. I think it's a very, very important perspective for us to have. A very important perspective. Yes, we want to add flavor, but we're not, our observance of the mitzvahs shouldn't be dependent on our understanding of the mitzvah. Even if I don't understand it, I'll observe it. You know, it's very interesting. I just went with my family this week. We went for the first time. We left Houston since the beginning of March. And we went to Surfside. It was great. We found a quiet area. It was great. Now, we saw after we were done at the beach, we walked along the pier. It was a very, very long pier. It's about a half a mile or so. And we walked all the way down the pier, and we see people fishing and so on and so forth. But we saw some people catching crabs, right? And I felt. Look, Rashi says in Leviticus, he says a person shouldn't say, you know why I don't eat pork? I don't eat pork because it's disgusting, right? Rashi says not to say that. Rashi says, you know why I don't eat pork? Because Hashem commanded me not to, right? That's why. It happens to be disgusting too, right? But that's why I don't. I don't eat it because Hashem commanded me, okay? So I said to my children, I said, the Torah says, Rashi brings this, that we shouldn't say that we don't eat it because it's disgusting. I said, I don't think I'm able to fulfill that. I looked at that crab, I'm like, that is so disgusting, right? I was like, nauseous from it, right? So I wasn't able to fulfill Rashi's words of not observing it because, not eating it. Of course, I don't have any intention to eat it, but why, if my children were to ask me why I don't eat it, I would say because it's disgusting, not because, right? It really looked disgusting. It was really, but that's just an idea of the perspective that Rashi is giving us here, is that we observe it because God commanded us, right? Now, added to that, there are many, 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 many other reasons and many layers of understanding. And that's why we have all of the thousands and thousands and thousands of books, of commentaries, of explanations of the Midrash, of the Mishnah, of the Talmud, of all of the thousands of years of our Torah being transmitted generation to generation, explaining, giving meaning and understanding to each mitzvah. Right? We don't do it as puppetry. We don't do it just right, but it's because this is the relationship builder. Okay, so I sense that Ed has something he wants to share with us. No, nothing. Oh, okay, great. Okay, so we're going to begin now with the reading here on page 272. Parshas Chukas we'll start with. We'll try to do a couple from each parsha that we have because it's a double portion again. So we'll start with Linda on page 272. Small deviation, big ramification.
Small deviation, big ramification. Because you did not believe in me to cause my name to be sanctified before the eyes of Bnei Yisrael, therefore you will not lead this nation into the land that I have given them.
So this is referring to Moshe hitting the rock instead of talking to the rock, right? A slight little adjustment, right? And his huge ramifications for it. Please.
When Miriam passed away, Bnei Yisrael lost their source of water. The miraculous spring of water that flowed from the rock, which accompanied them for the 40 years of their travels through the wilderness, was given to them in the merit of the righteous Miriam. With her death, the spring ceased to exist. Consequently, Bnei Yisrael complained to Moshe about the lack of water. Hashem commanded Moshe to speak to the rock and tell it to give forth its water, but instead Moshe hit the rock. The Torah tells us that this slight infraction was the sole reason that Moshe did not merit entering Eretz Yisrael. On the surface, this punishment does not seem so tragic, but when we take a closer look at its ramifications, we can appreciate just how catastrophic it was. Chazal tell us that had Moshe merited entering Eretz Yisrael, he would have built the Beis HaMikdash, and given the immortality of Moshe's handiwork, it would never have been destroyed. With this in mind, we can begin to comprehend the magnitude of the actions of our forefathers. When Abraham invited the three angels in the guise of Arabs into his tent, he personally served them food while he instructed someone else to bring the water. Rashi, citing Chazal, comments that Hashem rewarded Abraham's offspring in a similar manner during their travels in the wilderness. Their food, the man, was provided to them directly from Hashem, for it fell from heaven daily. In contrast, they received their water through an intermediary, the rock.
Right. So because Abraham served the angels directly, the Jewish people got fed directly. But because he asked a servant to bring the water, and he didn't do it himself, the Jewish people were sort of punished, and they didn't receive their water in the desert directly from Hashem, but rather through a rock. All right, Joan, please continue. You're muted.
Got it.
You have to turn off one of the. You have two devices.
Just put it away. Okay. Sorry, I didn't know how to turn it off. Are we still getting it?
We're still getting it a little. Okay, go. It should be fine.
It is mind-boggling.
No. Had Abraham.
Had Abraham.
Okay, one second. There's too much of an echo. Can you move it away?
Let me take it away.
Ed, please continue.
Okay. Had Abraham himself brought the water for his guests, Hashem would have reciprocated by providing Bnei Israel the water straight from the heavens, as he did with the manna. There would have been no rock to hit and no punishment for Moshe, who have led his flock into Eretz Israel and built the Beis Hamikdash. The Beis Hamikdash would have not been destroyed, and the ensuing exile would never have taken place. I kind of find that hard to believe.
Why?
The exiles and the destruction seem to, at least in other parts, the rabbis seem to say that was because they did idol worshiping and didn't do the commandments. And now they're saying, no, it's not, that's not the reason.
I don't know. What he's saying is we would never have gotten to that situation had Abraham not made that mistake of having his servant serve water, then the Jewish people would never have had this challenge in the desert with water. Moshe wouldn't have hit the rock. Then he would have built the temple. The temple would last forever because that's what our sages tell us, that Moshe, had he gone into the land of Israel, he would have built the temple, the Beit HaMikdash, and it would have stood forever, right? So then you would never have the resulting, right, challenges that came from it not being built by Moshe, from it not having that same influence and inspiration. And, so there's a lot of ramifications to one little mistake.
And I find that hard to believe, but okay. It's mind-boggling how a minor, not action by Avos, had such a far-reaching implication. Indeed, their actions are comparable to seeds planted in the ground that sprouted after the passage of many years. The slightest mutation at the time of the planting of a tree affects thousands of fruit, seeds, and trees for the rest of eternity.
Right. Howard.
While we are not the Avos, our actions are still seeds. Each mitzvah performed is a seed planted in this world, which will ultimately sprout in the next world. How we plant these seeds will determine the ultimate reward we receive for our actions. There is no better investment than performing a mitzvah with a smile, putting an additional ounce of kavana into a tefillah, or learning for an extra minute, since even the slightest positive nuance has eternal ramification.
Right. So it's such an amazing perspective that he's sharing with us here, that one little deviation, right? If you think about it, so you have two lines going alongside each other. But if there's a slight deviation, you know where it ends up? It ends up, it could forever, that's a responsibility that we're being charged with, is that our decisions that we make today have an impact on our children, on our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. If a person decides to live in a place, in a community, in a neighborhood that doesn't have good influences, what are the ramifications? It's one small decision to move houses, right? But a huge ramification of generations that could be impacted by that decision. And that's what we're seeing here, is that Abraham made a small little turn, right? And we see that generations later, right, we are suffering from that little deviation, from that little mistake that was made. I think it's a very, very, very powerful, thing. Over here, when we say about avos, about our ancestors, so our sages tell us, Ma'aseh avot siman lebanim, that the stories, the tales of what transpired to our ancestors is a sign of what will be for us, right? And here's a perfect example, but we have many times throughout history where things happen to the Jewish people. We have no idea why they happen, right? But our sages teach us that everything happens for a reason. We don't know what the reason is, right? But there is something from our ancestors, perhaps, that brings about, and it goes to the positive as well. The prayers that we say every morning. I remember when I was in yeshiva, my rabbi said to us that he says, "Who here is davening for their grandchildren?" And I was 15 years old, right? 15 years old, right? But he said to us a very beautiful idea. Every morning we say a blessing, V'harev no Hashem Elokeinu. Hashem, please make sweet as divrei sorascha befinu, the words of Torah in our mouth, right? Ubefios amcha b'Yisrael, make those words sweet in our mouths and in the mouths of all the Jewish people. V'niyeh anachnu v'tzetzaenu v'tzetzaenu, and we and our children and our grandchildren and our grandchildren's grandchildren. Kulanu yodei shemecha v'lomdei solosecha lishma, that we should all know your Torah and learn your Torah with its proper intention. Baruch atah Hashem ha'malami Torah l'amo Yisrael. Blessed are you, Hashem, who teaches Torah to his nation Israel. So my rabbi said, he says, do you know what you're praying there? You're not only praying for yourself to have sweet Torah, for you to have good understanding. He says you're praying for your children and your grandchildren, your great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren. You're praying for them today. And I think it's such an important perspective for us to understand that we have responsibility for our descendants, for all those who come after us. We have that responsibility to get them to feel inspired, to be inspired, but our prayers have an impact. I remember we had a student in camp. This is back in 1996 when I was in Ukraine, running a summer camp. So we had about 300 children, and I remember one of the children. All the kids, we would ask them their name and find out all of their family. But he was a descendant of one of the great sages who lived 100 years earlier. Was one of the most righteous people. Here, his great-grandchild, completely secular, didn't have a bris, didn't have tefillin, didn't have, you'd imagine, it's unbelievable. So what we were thinking to ourselves, do you know how many tears his great-grandfather cried for him to end up in this Jewish camp. Ultimately, he had a bris, and he went to yeshiva, and he lives in Jerusalem now, right? But you understand it's his grandfather's tears that were crying and saying, you know what, my great-grandchild is going to need these prayers. And when he said those prayers in the morning, I'm sure he had intention. His great-grandchild, he has no idea what's going to be with him. He's not even living yet. It's 100 years down the road or 200 years down the road. But that we have an impact. We have the ability. Those prayers never go to waste. The prayers that we say never go to waste. So if we don't know what to pray for, we're stuck. Well, thank God Hashem gave you such a beautiful life. Thank you, Hashem. Thank you, Hashem. Okay, now what do I pray for? Pray for your children. Pray for your grandchildren. Pray for your great-grandchildren. Right? For your great-grandchildren, they should all have health, and they should all have success, and they should all have a connection to God. They should all be uplifted. They should be spiritually connected, right? Grounded. That's what we have. That's what the lesson that we're learning here from this idea is not only the ramifications of Abraham's actions, but also with the ramifications of our actions for our children and grandchildren. Okay, let's go, if we can, let's go to Parshas Balak 278. All right, Howard, you still owe us one more more paragraph.
More prominence means more humility. He sent messages to Bilam, son of Beor, to Pesor, which is by the river of the land of the members of his people. Rashi on this pasuk asks, why did Hashem rest his Shekinah on a wicked non-Jew, Bilam? He answers, so that the nations should not have the ability to claim, had you also given us prophets, we would have repented. He gave them a prophet, and they broke all moral barriers. Originally, they acted morally, but Bilam encouraged them to behave immorally. We would have thought that once prophecy was being doled out to the nations, it should have been given to a more respectable individual than Bilam. However, truth be told, the actions of any non-Jew who would have received prophecy would have paralleled the conduct of Bilam. You want me to go on? Somebody else.
Elisa, you there?
You're muted. You're muted.
Oh.
Good morning, Elisa. How are you?
Good morning. Very well. How are you? It is not because you are the biggest of the nations that Hashem desired you, because you are the smallest of the nations. The Gemara explains that Hashem desires us because we are humble. For example, lower ourselves. He placed Abraham, Moshe, Aharon, and David in positions of prominence, but they did not let it get to their heads. Abraham said, I am dirt and ash. Moshe and Aaron said, we are nothing. David said, I am a worm, not a man. Chazal note that the opposite is true with regard to non-Jews who are given positions of prominence. I, Hashem, bestowed greatness upon Hiram, king of Tsur, and he said, I sat in the seat of God. I conferred prominence onto Nebuchadnezzar, and he boasted, I will climb onto the top of the mountains. I will be akin to the lofty one.
Continue.
Okay. Therefore, the Mishnah tells us, whoever has the following three character traits in a discipline of Bilam, an evil eye, an arrogant spirit, and a greedy soul. On the other hand, those who possess a good eye, a humble spirit, and a meek soul can be counted among the disciples of Abraham Avinu. Likewise, we find that halacha mandates that we bow 4 times during Shemona Esrei, while the Kohen Gadol must bow at the beginning and the end of each bracha, and a king must pray the entire Shemona Esrei while bowing. The greater position of prominence a Jew attains, the more he has to humble himself, a concept foreign to the other nations of the world.
Right. Joan, can you unmute?
Okay. Did you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
At every stage in a person's life, he has to work to overcome the tendency towards arrogance. How exactly does one work on this particular trait? Rab Yeruchayim Levovitz would advise people to seek counsel from someone of lesser stature and act accordingly. And implementing this idea on a daily basis will undoubtedly bring a person closer to humility. Additionally, a person who wishes to rectify the trait of arrogance should be fluent in the Igeris HaRamban.
Right, the letter of Ramban. We've learned it multiple times. The letter of the Ramban puts things right into perspective. Here, continue.
Written by the Rambam to his son, this is actually an entire book condensed in the form of a letter, which outlines a complete approach to serving Hashem based on the trait of humility. One should not simply read it as it would say any other letter. Rather, he should study it in depth. Such Musar study is a strategy of our stages in our battle against the Yitzhak Hara.
Right, so it's a real, thank you, John. What he's saying here is really phenomenal, and that is that in Judaism we find that the more prominent one is, the more they have to humble themselves, right? We bow 4 times by the Amidah, right? We bow 4 times. The Kohen Gadol bows 19 times in the Amidah for every blessing. The Kohen Gadol, right? The Kohen Gadol, every blessing. A king, a Jewish king, the entire Amidah, they have to be bowing. Why? Because the more prominent one is, the more likely it is for them to fall into the trap of arrogance. And that's something that our sages warn us is the most despised by the Almighty. Hashem hates arrogance. Hashem hates big shots. Tears them down, right? And what we see here is that we find so many examples throughout the Torah, throughout all of the prophets, throughout all of the writings, where we see prominence of non-Jews only cause them to be much more arrogant. And arrogance is not a trait. It says that the Jewish people, what are we? We're a Baishanim. One of the things that we are Baishanim. What's Baishanim? We are people who are shy, right? We're quiet, right? We're humble, right? Now, we have to know that in modern day, a lot of the Jewish people are not so quiet, they're not so shy, and they're not so. I would say even Baishanim, we carry with us a humility, right? And we know that every time we raised up our head, it's like whack-a-mole. Right? Every time the Jewish people raised their head, the nations of the world knocked us down again. We raise our head again. Instead of remembering, we should keep our head low. Keep our head low. We don't need to show off. We don't need to be big shots. We don't need to show the world how we are so great and we've got it all worked out. But the truth is like this, is that Rabbi Yerucham gives over here a great piece of advice. He says, take advice from someone who's smaller than you, smaller in wisdom, smaller in insight. Learn from someone else. Think of a child, right? You're going to ask your child for an opinion, right? You're going to ask him, right? Especially on an important matter. Yes. Go learn from a child and take their opinion and accept it, right? That's very humbling. It keeps you in check. Don't think like you're so high. And the additional thing is the letter of the Ramban. The letter of the Ramban is such an incredible letter, right? It's an amazing piece of our Jewish literature that we have. It's a very small letter, but so powerful and so deep. If you go on YouTube, I have multiple videos on the letter of the Ramban. It is worthwhile because it's so powerful. It goes so deep into the human psyche. It goes so deep into the human into the traits of humanity, of how we act and interact with one another, and the things that we need to make sure we stay in check, we keep ourselves in check, and not follow our emotions to think like we're so, take it easy, get back down to planet Earth, and remember who you are. So to our friends on Facebook, we're going to sign off. I know it's a little bit early. So thank you very much for joining us. And those of you who are on Torch Zoom, I will just continue for a minute. So to our friends online, thank you very much for joining us. Please like and share these videos and have a remarkable Shabbos.